Hi, everybody. I'm April Cummings. This is EDBEAT, and joining me, my co-host, Patrick Brendel from Cayman Current. Hey, Patrick.
Hi, April. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm going to say that when I went to bed, I was a bit fuzzy on what the rules were going to be for my kid heading off to school today. And so I sent my child off as normal and then looked in my email and went, whoops, she should have been wearing what? A mask? Surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. April, do you like surprises?
Depends on what
Because
they
then you
are.
said surprise.
So, for those of you who have not been watching, Patrick has been talking about masks and mask mandates for schools for a while because he had done a story, and it was good, good solid reporting there, Patrick, but that really talked about, how they are one of the most effective tools when it comes to keeping your brick and mortar classrooms open.
That's right.
True. And so the Cayman Islands, now that we've had a couple of incidents of local transmission, one of them centered around a primary school, Georgetown Primary, I sort of was waiting to see if Patrick's predictions would come true, and it looks like they did.
Yes. So, as background, so we've had 18 confirmed cases of COVID in students at Georgetown Primary School.
Mhm.
As of last night, and this was confirmed to me by the director of Department of Education Services, Mark Ray, that school, all the parents and staff and students are in isolation through the end of September. So I think he said September 29th, and they're
Oh.
waiting for a call from public health to decide when the school might reopen. And so what happened yesterday, since this is Friday for us, so Thursday afternoon, the government held a 2-hour press conference talking about new regulations that they were going to gazette
Right.
soon. And surprisingly absent from the press conference itself was a lot of the regulations that they ended up putting out. So
Mhm.
I was up a little later than you, maybe, because at 11:30 last night I got the email from
Yeah.
GIS, and it said, there's a mask mandate across all indoor places in Cayman,
Mhm.
including education institutions, which is government speak for schools.
Correct.
So a lot of people didn't know this, and as I noticed when we were dropping our kids off at school this morning, is kids are required to wear masks in school. Unless they're sitting at their desk quietly, then they can take their mask off. It's basically an extension of the mandatory masking in public schools. It's
Mhm.
now been extended to all the private schools starting today. And
Similar. So just to mention, Patrick, similar policy is currently in place, for example, in the civil service, right? So government buildings, same rule applies. And we've been practicing that all week, but now it's the real deal.
correct. And I guess there's the serious component to this is, and so this is for all kids age 5 and up.
Mhm.
And the serious component is that violating any of these regulations carries a penalty of 2 years in prison or $10,000 fine, or it might be and $10,000 fine. So everybody should follow the law.
Hmm. And look, I'm going to say, Cayman, it is hot, and this is not comfortable. And I know, especially after listening to some of the arguments in Florida, the masks can be uncomfortable. This can be challenging. It can be a distraction, but the only way for it to become a normal thing is to have to do it. That and things like the social distancing and hygiene. Interestingly enough, sometimes it is. We act like kids can't follow the rules or won't follow the rules or are going to refuse to do it. But I have to say, sometimes it's the kids who will drive the adult behavior. And so I have faith, Patrick. I have faith. I think we may have to do some research on the best, most comfortable masks for our young people in this climate. But in reality, I mean, I looked at it was the study you reported on from, was it Duke?
Yes.
that talked about masks in schools. Have you looked around anymore to see what else, whether that is still kind of the current thinking that masks and vaccinations are sort of the way to go?
Well, I'm glad you asked, April, because the answer is yes. And
Interesting.
before I get to that part of it, I'll say that on our website, we recently ran a viewpoint commentary from a local educator who argued that Cayman should follow guidelines in the UK on
Hmm.
mask wearing for kids.
Okay.
And so she thought it should only be for kids 11 and under, should not have to wear masks. So masks should only
Right.
be for
Right.
kids
Right.
age 12 and above. And her reasoning was she works with young kids is they're touching the mask, they're taking the masks off, they're
Hmm.
they're defeating the purpose of masks, and also she argued they're spreading more germs through the way that they're messing with the mask and getting them all dirty and stuff. So, um, in different places around the world, and World Health Organization kind of has a spectrum of when they recommend masks for ages. So, I guess it's not settled science, where the
Hmm.
debate isn't settled on how young is too young to make a kid wear a mask. But in Cayman, it's 5 and up, so that's clear. Um, so this week, I emailed a couple of sources in the U.S. Actually, it was a kind of a follow up story from one I had done a year ago. So last year, before schools opened, I contacted a two professors of medicine and two doctors uh, who one is in Chicago and one is at Johns Hopkins. So
Hmm.
Northwestern and Johns Hopkins, and it is interesting because they were actually these experts. One is a pediatric infectious disease expert, right, and the other is more like in the realm of public health. And they were the expert resources for a webinar put on for the Education Writers Association in the US. So these were kind of hand selected top experts in the US to discuss COVID guidelines in schools. So I got in touch with them last year and asked, what are your recommendations? How should a place like Cayman, which at the time didn't have COVID in the community, how should we approach safeguard against COVID in schools? And their answer at the time was masks, and then do common sense stuff like wash your hands, social distance, good ventilation, etc. So then this week I followed up with them again. I said, hey, it's been a year. Cayman actually went a whole year without having to close schools because of COVID, which is fortunate. Now that we do have some community transmission, how have your guidelines changed? And according to lessons that you've learned in the U.S. and elsewhere over the past year, and they said masks and common sense guidelines like washing your hands and ventilation. And then the extra component, which is right up there with masks, is they said vaccinate. So
Yeah.
vaccinate, wear masks. Your priority should be to keep your brick and mortar schools open and keep the kids in class as much as possible. If they get sick, pull them out. Do proactive testing to try to identify COVID before it has the chance to spread too much. Get the kids out and isolate them. But whatever you do, don't close. Try not to close all the schools. And I think, in the words of one of the doctors said, virtual learning was not an effective solution. So the priority
Close.
is. Mhm.
Is to keep the brick and mortar open, right? And mind you, the nerd in me still loves the idea of virtual learning, right? I do. I
Yes.
think being comfortable and practiced in using remote tools. It's kind of like, when I learned to type on that typewriter the old fashioned way, I had to practice it on a consistent basis in order to have my speed to where it needed to be. So, me, the non education expert, would say, absolutely keep the brick and mortar schools open, but doesn't it also make sense to continue to practice the components of virtual learning, whether that's, I think at prep, I'm trying to, I should know, I'm a parent there too, right? I should remember, we called it, I don't know, it's like Web Wednesdays or something, much like fire drills or whatever it
Hmm.
is. Should we not continually, as part of our infrastructure, practice having to do remote learning? Because you do not know when you will have a pocket, a classroom, or an entire school, as we saw in Georgetown Primary's case, have to shut down for a bit.
Well, I think there's a couple of considerations. So we had, we had the Homeschool Association, um, Kathleen Spencer, last week, and she was talking about how effective it can be, homeschooling and virtual learning. And one of the things is these kinds of programs and these environments are built for virtual learning. So when
Yeah.
you sign up for a virtual learning program, it's been put together by people who know all about virtual learning, and this is the business they're in. It's
Hmm.
a lot different when you have a brick and mortar school that is built around delivering in-person education than having to shift to virtual learning.
It
I mean,
is.
just
Yes. Yeah.
they're as you said, they're not going to be as practiced and probably not as good at doing virtual learning as they are doing in-person learning, and probably not as good as the virtual learning specialists. And
Yeah.
I guess the other thing I think about is the impact on parents. And
Yes. Which
really,
is the
like
other
when you
real
close the schools,
challenge.
you close the economy. You
Yeah.
close the schools. Parents are at home. They can't go to work.
Hmm.
Um,
And if their businesses are not designed for this,
yes.
um, you feel that it's a ripple effect
Yeah.
as well.
So it's something I think we should be able to do, and we should be able to take better advantage of telecom technology. But I don't think we're there yet,
Yeah.
except
And
us
I,
on EDBEAT.
well, look, and if you've been watching, right, the first episodes, you could barely see or hear anything on my end
Yeah.
because my expertise was traditional video, which is fancy cameras and tripods and lights and studios. And so, I've had to work each episode to try to improve the thing on my end. And I suppose that's why I feel that way, where I think it's kind of important to incorporate almost as part of the curriculum, not just the here's how to use a computer and do Microsoft Office and Word, but the ability to communicate, practice knowing how to get your webcam set up correctly and tweak your audio levels. And I just think those skills are going to be important after school anyway. And even if our primary emphasis is let's keep those brick and mortar schools open, um, I still think it's wise to incorporate the technology aspect of it, because it's kind of like you won't know which families don't have internet until you have a shutdown, for example.
Right.
So just bearing in mind that this is the type of thing we should be preparing for needs to be incorporated in that educator's toolkit and the administrator's toolkit as well. And as one who should have been able to get a crystal clear, perfect live stream day one with EDBEAT, but didn't because I was using different resources with different time issues and different things going on, I think it's a perfect example for why it is important to incorporate that into the playbook. And different age children will have different needs, and some teachers are great at this stuff. Some of them are not. And then how do you incorporate some of the human connections in an online universe that you would do in a classroom? So as a reporter, you may interview people in person or interview them online or interview them on the phone. And there are things about reading the body language and stuff that are different. So yeah, it's not, for me, it's not just school, but I feel like it's important for them to learn. Okay, off soapbox currently.
Learning is
Back.
important.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
And
Yeah.
learning about technology and how to use it on an ongoing basis is really important as well.
Yeah.
Check
And
number
and I
two.
will say a lot of the schools have, they said one of the silver linings of COVID was being forced into using this technology, which
Yeah.
they've seen the practical uses going forward. So I
Mhm.
know there's been an elimination of a lot of kind of sent home paperwork, better
Right.
use
Yeah.
of things like Teams, and teachers giving feedback electronically rather
Yeah.
than pass off the paper and then in a week you get the paper back with big question marks all over it if it's my work.
Or it's in the bottom of some kid's bag, and
Yeah,
I don't see it till 2 years later when they're not even in that
yeah,
class anymore.
yeah.
Yeah, true.
And you
So
misspelled onomatopoeia.
I can't even say that word correctly anymore. So I mean, for the kids though in the schools, not entirely a big shock, but definitely going to be a big adjustment. And we're at the start of the school year, essentially, right? So I'd love to hear from some schools about how it's going on this, and because it's not just the masks. The masks are the most visible, obvious thing, but it's other things too. I mean, some schools have implemented patterns in how you make your way through the school.
Mhm.
I forget why. There's an important reason for that, and also things like, what's where you have where kids can eat lunch, the
Yes.
bubbles that were set up for certain groups that maybe got dismantled. I just see a variety of things that are going to take some practice, and more for some schools than others.
Yeah, and some of it's like crowd management
Yes. Yeah.
and things like no more school assemblies. I know
Yeah.
some school masses have been canceled at the religious schools.
Hmm.
Um, Having kids eat their lunches inside their classrooms as opposed to the cafeteria.
Yeah.
The doctor in the U.S. said that a popular option has been to hold things like, say, choir or singing, or have the kids do it outside where it's a lot safer than inside.
Ah, interesting.
And
Hmm.
right now with it being 40 degrees Celsius, it's not it's not as attractive an option right now. But in a couple of months, that's going to
Yeah.
be kind of a good luxury of living in the Cayman Islands, is maybe spending a little more time outdoors in the shade.
We should have planted a few more trees or not knocked as many down, I think. They'd be really helpful about now. Okay, so is there anything we've missed on this front? Because legitimately, I'm still processing what the rules are, and the crowd control limits exist as well. But even during lockdown, I noticed, I cannot, not during lockdown, but post lockdown, I noticed that even church choirs, for example, they simply space them out differently, and you do have to adapt to that. Sports. I put in a question at the press briefing yesterday about, uh, group sports, or inter-school sports for that matter, contact sports. So the regulations are published, as you've said. Today's Friday that we're taping this, and I did that thing where I zipped through them as fast as possible, and then zipped back, and then zipped up. So I still need to really just kind of read more carefully what they say we can and cannot do. But it just feels like less big crowds, more social distancing. We can no longer say we're in the bubble but doesn't have to wear the masks, because that is gone. And yeah, even meetings, people are starting to schedule, not all meetings are being done electronically, but I'm starting to get requests for offsite meetings, because the capacity of a building, they're trying to reduce the number of people inside the building, by, say, 50% or something. So there is some there is some work underway on that front. Um, DES also did mention emotional support and such for kids, and that makes more sense than ever too, right? Because, oops, Patrick, did I lose you? You look beautifully frozen right now. I'm going to turn you off and on and hope that works. Um, Patrick left me. Patrick has now returned to me. I don't know how long you were gone, but I was having a lovely conversation with
I
myself.
could hear you.
Okay, that's good.
It was great.
That was so good. But so there are a lot of, I guess it's just there are a lot of changes in the works, and density in buildings is another one of those things where we may have to just do things a bit differently for a bit. The wellness and health and wellness minister talked a little bit about, the past few times anyway, talked a bit about emotional and mental support, and so did the Mark Ray from DES. And that may be important as well too, because not everyone's personality or temperament is suited to some of the things that we're going to be expected to do. So that's just something that we're going to need to pay attention to for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's also important that the government has put it like right up there in paragraph 2 that regulations subject to change and tweaking. So they may provide some clarification or exemptions, or walk something back, or tighten
Mhm.
something up, within the next day or
Days,
week.
weeks.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of a flexible rolling approach. in response to like what the current state of the virus is in the community.
Which is important to note. I do say, though, as one who makes a supplemental living doing things like live streams on location for folks, um, I did not plug my own self, I promise. It's just that I have a lot of interaction with hotels here who the tourism industry is not open for them. So they were starting to, the business of doing events was starting to pick up again. This is that time of year when people do a lot of celebrations or awards or ceremonies. And so because of the live stream part of my life, I was really seeing that start to pick up again. It can go either way, though, with crowd restrictions. They may decide to do more of the live streaming or less of the events, but you do see an impact of every one of these decisions. And what I'm getting to is the less time you have in terms of lead time about these changes, the harder it can be for people, because planning and scheduling is an important part of events. And I got so many phone calls from people in the church communities and some schools, but church community in particular, because they're trying to figure out what they're going to do for their Sunday services this weekend. They were trying to figure that out on Monday, and they got hints about rules, but no mandates about rules yet. So I feel their pain is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I mean, really, this one really hit home because we were planning on launching our first, I call them current events, out in the community where we would be holding either speakers or panel discussions in front of start off with a small group audience, and then have Cayman Life TV video them and just broadcast it, disseminate it. And the first one was actually set for Wednesday, and we had lined up. So we had all-star lineup. We had Cayman Life TV, Cayman Current. DART was one of the sponsors. Chamber of Commerce was sponsoring, so we were going to hold it at Chamber HQ. And we had Nicola Williams from the Early Childhood Association, who was ready to give a really interesting presentation on kind of early years literacy programs, and also a global perspective on investments in early childhood education. And I've seen parts of the presentation, and it's really compelling. And it was supposed to happen this Wednesday, and then I'm on the phone with Will from the chamber last Friday, and we said, how can we send out invitations for this? How can we hold this if we don't know if it can actually happen or not? And then so we said, well, let's wait to see what they say last Friday. The guidelines didn't come out. They didn't come out over the weekend. They didn't come out through the week. And finally, it's just, I had to make the call.
Yeah.
I just don't think we can do this right now.
And now looking at the guidelines, you might have been able to do an amended version of it, but you don't know. And so,
yeah, and I still don't know if the speaker has to wear a mask if they're talking in front of a group of people, or if if I just have them sit at a desk and do their work quietly, then they can.
12 feet away from the people. And I was looking at some of the reporters in the US I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but I'll pull it off. So this is basically a lavalier microphone. Most people use them. Reporters use them a lot when they're doing their TV stuff because they're kind of relatively small and discreet, right? So I was literally thinking, I wonder if someone on stage could wear a microphone under the mask, but would it bounce back? Would there be problems? This sounds so silly because we're talking about, health and wellness, but in real life, you have to find a way to work around the things that are going on so that you can still have a life. And these were questions that I had not pondered because we were in our lovely bubble here. So I still think we're going to be able to do an event, Patrick. We're just going to have to figure out how to do the event and work through things that normally might not have been a challenge. And I suspect that there are lots of people going through that.
Yeah, and we're actually prepared for this. I got in touch with an organization called the Texas Tribune, which is a major nonprofit news organization in Austin. And this was several months ago. And I talked to their head events person who used to work for, I believe, the New York Times, and is, top of class and doing this stuff. And it was interesting because I was asking for guidance on how to host in-person events. And she was in the whole other world. She goes, wait, in-person events? We're doing all of our stuff virtually. They're doing multi-day festivals. thousands and thousands of people. So the guidance that she had shared with me was mostly for these virtual first events. So I need to go back and listen to what she said.
Welcome to my world. If you think we're going left, then we're going right, then we're going left. But the advantage is the world has been practicing this for the past 18 months. So it's much easier in some ways to have someone to reach out to and get guidance from on, how do we adapt and amend and stay as safe as we can. And I have to say, even though I too had just the crazy heart palpitations when the news, particularly of the Georgetown primary situation, occurred, I was not as frantic nor as stressed nor as panicked, still some, as I would have been had this happened a year ago.
Yes.
So
you weren't washing your boxes of cereal?
No, I will say this. I compulsively would put hand sanitizer, and I have a bottle of what appears to be hairspray in the car. It's like one of those pump bottles. It's full of alcohol. And so people were looking at me funny because every time I get in the car, I didn't drink it, I would spray the wheel and the thingamajig. And anyone who knows me and can see on the other sides of this screen knows that I'm not the tidiest person on the planet either, right? So if you see me spraying and wiping, you know that I'm just really experiencing the fear. But in truth, it's nowhere near what it was when the entire thing played out. And one of the things that and I know this is going to be, the world will see me say this, and I shouldn't sound disrespectful. Look, people talking for long periods of time, except for myself, I lose interest pretty quickly. And not you though, Patrick, always.
You're looking at the timer on this episode.
I'm like 27 minutes. But things like press conferences and briefings, if people start to talk too long, I start to have trouble retaining the information. And so I start going, what did they just say? What did they just say? But I did hear something that did stick. And one of those things was really about the fact that, look, we're going to have to live with this. This was bound to happen. It was inevitable. We may not like it. We may not want it. Fear is actually not going to help us in this situation. And so the thing to do really is to prepare and practice. They didn't say prepare and practice. I made this up because I like the alliteration with the P's. I don't have a third P, but we'll find one. But the idea is really just, let's go ahead and get on with life as best we can and try to move forward. And for our kids, what I want for them most is that they feel like we're looking out for them and taking care of them. And since we're on the education/COVID subject, a question that I've received consistently from people who were primary contacts, that means they would have been in contact with someone for 10, 15 minutes within a certain distance, who tested negative on their PCR test, have continued to ask why they have to be in quarantine for 14 days. And I know it's hard, but the stupid virus thing can take 14 days to show up. I've had people test negative and then a week later test positive. So I know it sucks being at home for 14 days. My family can't stand me for even 7 days with no escape, but it's the safest thing to do under the circumstances. Sorry, I had to plug it, Patrick, because I feel so bad. I know. It's like the test said I'm negative. Why can't I leave this house? But it's just the way the thing works. It's sneaky. All right, so
the virus is more patient than we are.
It feels like a meme, Patrick. It really does. All right, so I know that you've been hard at work as well, and as I'm laughing away about my meme, you are covering, I think, a very serious subject and one that is a bit touchy in Cayman Current. Let's talk a little bit about that. And it's really, I think, about the demographic of our schools or the composition of the different racial, I don't know. I never can get the phrasing right. No, I can't because I'm in the middle of all the races. So I'm always a bit confused. I'm always like, I don't know who I am today. And I attributed that to growing up in Cayman with a mixed race family with multiple layers of feedback. And I got people from Europe, I got people from Cuba, from Jamaica, from all over the world. And in recent years, the schools have started to look different. And that's such a sensitive topic, but one that we really should be discussing, and we shouldn't be so uncomfortable discussing it, in my view. So, at risk of getting us into trouble by me misspeaking and saying something inappropriate on the way, because I do have a weird sense of humor, what made you decide to cover the topic of, I guess, essentially race in schools?
Yeah, and as you said, this is a serious and sober subject, and something that I've worked on for. I started hearing about it really over the past year with parents, usually Caymanian parents who had grown up here and gone to school, and then when they bring their kids to schools, they're surprised about how the class makeup looks markedly different than kind of this multi-hued people say black, white, neither and don't care kind of
We're
mentality
all,
that
yeah,
would have been in this 60s and 70s in Cayman.
right.
And then they go to these schools and they're surprised when they're predominantly dark skinned or predominantly fair skinned student body makeup. And so typically when we talk about, or when I talk about, or it's on the campaign trail, the idea of segregation in the school system.
Right.
It's based on immigration status. So Caymanians who can look like anybody,
Yeah.
and non-Caymanians who can also look like anybody. But this story is really about, when it comes down to it, skin pigmentation and the issue that there are public schools in Cayman and some private schools that will be almost overwhelmingly um, dark skinned children and to a certain extent faculty. And then on the other side, there are certain private schools in Cayman that are predominantly fair skinned
Mm-hmm.
children. So what this story does is and I spent 2 months doing active reporting on it. And I've
Right.
talked to people like former UCCI President Roy Bodden, UCCI Associate Professor Christopher Williams.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to only one Caymanian parent would actually talk to me about this, even off the record,
Oh,
or anonymously.
interesting.
Everybody else said, "No, I'm not really my place to actually talk to you about this." So this shows how sensitive it
Really?
is, and I
Yeah.
agree. And I did have a really good interview with the principal of CIS, Jim Urquhart, who was
Mm-hmm.
very thoughtful on the subject. And so it really examines not only the fact that there is color divides in the school system, but we look at kind of the history of it, maybe some potential causes of it, and how it relates to socioeconomic disparities.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
then what I think is important is you're not just, and I think I've said this before too, you're not just pointing out something that you think is noteworthy or being critical of just to
Mm.
point it out. But
Right.
what you
I
look is
mean, I
like,
can
how
see
does
that. Yeah.
this, how can this lead to real negative, possibly lead to negative consequences in the future? So I guess I can give a tease. I'm going to publish this later today, but
Great. Yeah.
the lead paragraph right now is I think the key question, which is, could the structure of our country's education system be fostering racial divisions in younger generations that have not previously been a hallmark of Cayman Island society?
Mm.
So one of the things that in our history is Cayman has had a much more comity between people of all different racial backgrounds than say somewhere like Bermuda or the United States, where I come from, where a lot of things are seen in terms of this paradigm, or even other places in the Caribbean like Jamaica. But so could the way that our school system has played out, could we actually be nurturing this kind of division that nobody wants to see? So,
Yeah.
unlike COVID, which is really a very urgent and important topic right now and for the rest
Mm-hmm.
of the year, I think these kind of social issues are things that have taken, they developed over 500 years, and they're not going to be solved in the next 5 minutes or 5 days or even 5 years. But it's something that we need to have an acknowledgement of and a sustained look at. And I think the first step is to, as you said, is to talk about it and have conversations about it.
And Patrick, I am one of those people who's old enough, old enough um, to started school. I think it was like Montessori school in the States, and then I came here because my mother's Caymanian, but her grandmother went to Cuba from north side, and then they had a kid, and then my father, he met in Cuba, and then they went to the States, and then they came, so I've got this very strange, this strange circuitous route back to Cayman. So I went to Savannah Primary School, which is a government, it's public school as you would call in the U.S. I went to Triple C as well, which is a school one had to pay to go to. Which was very challenging for my parents because my parents worked their tails off, but money was not something that was on their priority list to make or have. But they believed in education firmly. And then, some 1 year of what I would call prep school in the US, which is different than in the UK, but it was very much focused. I mean, the cost of that prep school, I looked it up recently, was about the same as 2 years of college in some places, right? And then I went to college/university, both here and in the US. And I did not see a problem with my racial anything until I hit that prep school in the US. Even though we did have some stuff in Cayman about, light skin, dark skin, or your daddy's a Yankee is what they used to, they used to tease me, your daddy's a Yankee. He was from West Virginia. I don't think that's a Yankee, but but he was very white, very bald. And, my mom,
He's a
gorgeous,
mountaineer.
He was a preacher's kid, so who knows? But what I'm saying is that while the seeds of that mountain mama or something, those seeds were there, but I also in the school environment went to school with kids who were from across the spectrum. They weren't all of one type or another. But as the schools got divided, I noticed the children that came after me did start to begin to experience that divide. Not just about skin pigmentation, though. A lot of it was about who had money and who didn't have money, because circles started to develop around that. And I still see this today. Assumptions made based on which school the kids go to about what kind of people they are going to be. Those assumptions are not always wrong or not always right, but the fact that the instinct is to automatically cluster people because they're at this school, and that's the what is it, the not rich kid school or the not white school or the whatever school, you know what I mean? Like you see it, and I hear it coming from 13
Yes.
and 14 and 15-year-olds, and I'm thinking this does not bode well for the future. So,
Yeah. And I've actually heard it troubling. I've heard it from school leaders and presentations in front of parents, and they'll say, "Oh, well, these kids, they're not the kind of kids that go to our school." And I take offense at that because,
it's awful.
some of these schools are right next door to each other, and the parents live right next door to each other, but it's almost like a marketing thing.
Yeah, it is.
And this is, of course, coming mostly from people who aren't from here. I'm not from here, but people coming in who think this is the way that you have these little dog whistles about how different kids are of different caliber, and I don't like it, and I tell them I don't like it.
It's very discomforting. It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, and I'm from Texas, right? And I come from a town that's majority Hispanic, and the way people talk about race, I mean, it's totally different. I mean, you're just saturated in this kind of thinking. And I didn't even realize it until I went to school in northern Indiana, where they have a totally different way of being saturated and talking about different prejudices. And then I come here, and it's totally different, and in my opinion, a lot healthier than the environment.
I'm not saying we're perfect, but the question you've posed that bears examination is a good question to ask. And those are the kinds of questions that, again, that's not the breaking news sexy headline, but it's important to explore, to take from it what we can, and just, if we don't look at it, nothing will change.
Yeah, I mean, but things will change, but in ways that you don't control.
Yeah,
like
there's that.
If you ignore the tumor, the only thing that could happen is it stays the same or it grows.
Yeah, and we want the best, right, for our kids, for their futures, and for the country as well. And I have seen some divide between people that is discomforting, and it really shows up most during periods of stress. When something is stressful going on. So COVID is a perfect example of that. The us and them became louder in many corners because there was this big pressure upon people. And I think we're not going to be more collaborative and work together if we don't, do our best to see each other as human first. Man, that is soapbox number 3 for me today. Patrick, I don't know if you're bringing out the best or the worst here, dude.
The best. Only the best.
Only the best.
We have only the best people on this show.
Only the best. Wait, shoot, I didn't fix my hair. But you see, vanity. Appearance discrimination. Is that a thing? Yeah, that's a thing. I made up the term, but it's a thing. So I really look forward to reading the article. And, this sounds also like the kind of thing that would be a really good discussion for your panels, your events when you have them. Because it is complicated and there are no easy answers. But first, looking at the problem and identifying some of the causes can sometimes lead to finding solutions. And it's not like it's an easy fix, but baby steps, man.
Yeah, and the beauty about panels is as I can get people who are way more eloquent and way more informed than I am.
We're saying man every minute like I do.
Something really stupid and offensive.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not intentional either. But it's
well, usually.
Usually. Reporters, journalists, news people, not always the most sensitive, I must say. All right, so yes, I have kept you too long, and I do have to go. Is there anything?
So I just say, everyone read the story, and I really want to hear from the community. And on sensitive topics, I realize the realities of living in a small, close-knit society, and people legitimately worried about consequences if they do speak out on certain subjects. And I think this is one of those where it's almost, for me, it's like no questions asked. If you want to give a constructive, then totally honor your confidentiality. I've never yet. I don't think I've ever burned anybody ever. And if anybody watching this, I burned you. I'm sorry. I didn't know.
We call it burning a source. Don't burn a source.
And I never intend to.
And constructive, I'm just going to say it out there. If you're coming from a place of concern and kindness, sometimes your feelings are not kind, but they're important and honest. That does not mean that Patrick is going to blast you out over that. It really means that it gives him more information that he can incorporate into his understanding of the subject as well, and then try to find ways to address that. See, Patrick, I put you in a little box there, but... All right, that is all the time we have because I literally have gone over by 15 minutes from my allotted time. The internet will be yelling at me or Patrick at any moment now. For those of you who have not been viewers of our exciting EDBEAT, Patrick is with Cayman Current. It is a nonprofit, journalistic education enterprise. I just make it up every week, Patrick. What should I be calling
Whatever sounds great. Whatever sounds good.
Really, sounds really sophisticated. But
and we set up PayPal yesterday.
Woo!
So all the people, and this is the one thing that's been keeping you from donating, CaymanCurrent.org/support-us, or we have buttons all over the place to donate. Now you can do it right from PayPal. Anything from $1 on up, we appreciate everything that people can give.
I'm going to add you to my family and friends section on PayPal. This is also how I feed my children overseas. So, it's all good, man. All right, guys, thanks so much. And yes, CaymanCurrent.org, good coverage of journalistic good journalistic coverage of education, but also remember that feedback helps to let Patrick know what issues that you're interested in covering. It's a great website and a great resource. And yes, I use it in my own desire to be a better reporter / journalist person as well, because Patrick does do a lot of data work, which is really helpful for providing context so that I can't just say everyone in the schools is X, Y, and Z. Because of Patrick, I can say with a little more certainty just what some of those numbers look like. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time. All right, now I got to figure out how to turn us off, Patrick.